Those who grew up poor, what is something those who weren't poor don't understand about being poor? Story 1. You just get so tired. It feels like there's no resting because there's always the pervasive feeling that you should be doing/making/fixing something. Poverty means constant planning for the next meal, for the next bill, for the next crisis. Story 2. The constant fear of running out of money that creates this weird obsession over and guilt about spending money, even when you've got decent finances. I grew up poor and my partner grew up upper middle class. We have managed to carve out a pretty comfortable life, but I still have panic attacks about money and being able to afford essentials, food, rent, etc. They are flabbergasted every time it happens, like supportive but completely confused as to why I get so upset. My response is always, money can run out. Story 3. How much relationships matter. You're a lot safer in a dangerous neighborhood if you know and have good allies/friends in the neighborhood. It's a lot easier to share a bedroom with 4 or so other people if you like those people. You can't afford that new car part, but if you know that dude in the neighborhood who fixes cars, he might hook you up for a little cash, etc., etc. TLDR, having solid, good relationships with people you have history with can make a world of difference. Story 4. Your parents not being able to support you into adulthood. Hell, mine stopped being able to when I was 15. I can always tell someone didn't come from poverty when their suggestion to somebody facing financial troubles is, talk to your parents. Story 5. One thing people who weren't poor don't really get is how you always had to think about money on every little thing. Like, even simple stuff like snacks or going to the movies wasn't just a fun idea. It was, can we afford it? Or do we have enough to cover everything else? I remember wearing hand-me-downs that didn't fit quite right and pretending not to care when kids teased me, or when the power would get cut off and we will sit around with candle. It wasn't just about not having stuff. It was the constant worry and knowing that one little thing going wrong could mess everything up. That's the part people don't really see. Story 6. Being poor is very expensive. For example, if you're unable to afford to pay a speeding ticket, it will accrue late fees, making it even harder to pay off. If you need money right now to buy food and pay rent, payday loan shops can help you, but with exorbitant interest rates, so you'll end up paying back way more than you borrowed. If you have a toothache but can't afford to see the dentist, it can grow into something worse and more costly to fix. Story 7. Maybe Obamacare has helped, but healthcare wasn't a thing. Need stitches, the lady across the street did that for hamburger meat. Got jumped in the bathroom and have a big knot on your head, lay down in the dark while your mom tells you not to fall asleep. I joined the Coast Guard when I turned 18, and boot camp was the first time I had been to a dentist. My mom had mental health issues. She would get jobs and then lose them. She used me as a pawn in her games with my dad. I went to 21 schools from 7th grade to graduation. You don't get to go to college when you have been to 9 different high schools and have months-long gaps between them. People say it's about making good choices. What if don't know anyone who makes those like ever? I joined the military and pulled myself up by my bootstraps, so to speak. But it took its toll on my body for sure. But I would be dead or in prison if I hadn't had a 10th grade teacher who wrote me a plan in detention that would be the best advice I ever got. Story 8. From the other side. My husband grew up poor and I grew up rich. And apparently, according to him, I often said things that made it clear I had no idea what it was like to struggle financially. I didn't understand why he would shop at thrift stores when, in my own words apparently, Target and Walmart are cheap and unused. I didn't understand why he would put unfinished drinks in the fridge instead of dumping them down the sink. I didn't understand why he bought so many food ingredients when restaurants exist and are less work. Don't worry, I've been explained to and humbled since, and now he can afford things he never had as a kid. Story 9. How you sort of rack up illnesses and health issues from the constant stress and lack of medical care. When I got out of poverty, there was a couple of years where I was playing catch-up on all these things just to get myself back to baseline normal. Steroid shots to stop the daily migraines, appointments to a neurologist to make sure the migraines weren't a sign of something more serious, checking up on those stomach ulcers I got in college and didn't do anything about because tuition was due. And all the doctors would ask why I had no medical history and would be surprised when I told them this was the first time I could afford to see them. Story 10. Food guilt. I have food insecurity, but the guilt is just as much. Every bit of food I eat when money starts to get low, or even when I am visiting people who have money, I feel like I am stealing from the rest of the household. I'm hungry, but if I eat these 2 pieces of toast, that's 2 pieces less for partner/parent/sibling/friend who might need it more. As the oldest child, foregoing things so others could have them is a part of my DNA. Story 11. This is maybe more applicable to poor people in urban centers, but you don't get any privacy and everything's always loud. Your apartment's probably too small for the amount of people living there, and you don't have a private outdoor space. You can probably also hear your neighbors, and they can hear you. You do your laundry in the laundromat. You either walk or take public transit as transportation, and you're definitely going to be that kid who loses their on the subway at some point. Story 12. Our pipes froze every year because we lived in a poorly insulated trailer. My mother would collect snow and melt it on the stovetop for water to do laundry, teeth brushing, etc. That's a type of poor people don't appreciate until they do it every year for months at a time. Story 13. When you're a kid and it clicks that you should never ask for things or show that you want something, since all it does is make your folks upset because they can't get it for you. Never finishing school projects because you know they can't afford the supplies, so you just take the F. Being the only kid from your class who didn't go on the field trip, so you work in the school office all day. Or if there are more of you, they'll let you just sit in the cafeteria or library all day. And then to cap it off, you're senior when your parents ask about class rings or yearbooks, you tell them you never got the form or just forgot about it. Story 14. Going to the grocery store and not being able to afford the food you very exactly budgeted for because they raised the price of an item. The most mortifying experience ever is getting to the register and discovering your total is mere cents above what you can afford, so you have to pick an item to put back. Or finding out your card won't go through because you forgot you paid your car insurance and there's not enough money in your account to cover your groceries. Oh, wrong card. Let's try this one. Declined. That's not the one. Let's try this one. Declined. Can we split the payment onto multiple cards? Oh, there's not enough on that card to cover it. I'm sorry. Never mind. I'll find out what money I have where and come back. As you walk of shame worse than any college one-night stand has ever felt. Carrying your infant child on your hip, leaving your groceries all behind because you can't afford them. I wish no one ever had to feel this way, but I also kind of wish everyone had to at least once. Story 15. The biggest thing I remember being judged for was not being able to drive until I was already in my third year of college. Back at my first job, fast food job, I remember this one girl wanting me to switch with her in the morning shift, which I couldn't make because the bus doesn't run that early. She gave me attitude and said, "You can't switch for something important for me," to which I responded, "If it's important, you should have planned ahead of time." Then she literally cried saying that was mean and that she won't have her car tomorrow, and all I can think was, boo-hoo, B*******, I don't even have a car. Another instance, after my first proper job, I hooked up with a pretty wealthy lady. We were talking about our past, and she mentioned how she wouldn't have hooked up with me if she knew I was a loser who couldn't drive until my mid-20s. And I had to look at her firmly and tell her, "You don't know what it's like to have to pay for your own driving lessons and car because you have abusive parents that neither can nor will teach you how to drive and buy you your first car." Story 16. I was watching a Technology Connections video recently where he talks about the Duracell battery with power check and why it failed. Alongside his conclusion that many things come with rechargeable batteries now, he also stated that batteries live in the pack until they are needed in a device, where they stay until they're dead. No one needed to check the level. When I was growing up, there were 4 AAs and 3 AAAs that lived in a drawer, and you used them while you were playing with a toy, and then you put them back when you were done. I guess that's one. Also, the canned pumpkin pie filling that makes up about 1/2 of the food drive bin usually is just making the rounds, as that is the same can that I would donate to the bin when they would come around. And then there were field trips. It's $10 and a signed permission slip, but I had to pass in an IOU. Story 17. My one friend couldn't wrap his head around why one of the minimum wage workers at our company couldn't afford a new t-shirt, which he had brought up to him as being something he's saving up for. He blamed it on his priorities, said he should take the money out of his vacation budget or something. Ha ha ha. Story 18. The embarrassment that comes with having to write an essay about what you did over summer and or spring break and present it in front of your classmates whose families could afford to go on vacations, to camp, the movie theater, hell, even to visit a relative out of town. I used to dread these assignments. They came up every year without fail. Story 19. How expensive it is to be poor. Poor people don't have car insurance, and the tickets are expensive. You work hard to pay a lot to keep a broken car running so you can work to pay for the car. You triage bills, and car insurance is always last after food and rent. Things like weed and beer are a cheap escape from the daily grind of poverty. When I was a kid, we only had milk the couple days after my dad got paid. Now every time I open my fridge and see milk, I feel rich. Story 20. That you never outgrow it. Even though I make good money now, I still bargain shop, never turn down a gig, and do most anything myself before hiring out. I finish a thing before opening a new one. Food waste still makes me insane. The fear and stress are less, but they never go away. Story 21. A less dramatic point, putting coffee mugs mouth down so mice and bugs can't crawl in. Putting stuff like flour and rice in containers rather than leave them in the bag so the mice and roaches can't get in. Sleeping wearing long underwear to make sure you don't get bit up. Waking up with bleeding blisters because you are sleeping on a concrete floor and condensation from the temp difference. Washing pots and pans before you use them, even though they are clean, because you out of habit assume rats have crawled over them in the cabinets. Lastly, what drove my wife nuts, I own a 108 color crayon set that sits in my office. I never use them. When you are that 8 crayon kid in school. Story 22. Constantly moving to stay one step ahead of creditors means you have no long-term friends nor goals. Well-meaning people grilling you about how you are doing when you can't tell anyone about your situation is a special hell, especially when you are very young. Health issues that you just endure, because even if you could afford a doctor's visit, no adult is around to take you since they cannot miss work. Story 23. That being hungry really is painful. That being cold or too hot is no joke. That being made fun of at school is non-repairable. That your parents pretty much abandoning you is frightening. That your parent tried to sell you to men for money and you were able to talk your way out of it. With the men was scariest day ever and left you with permanent scars on your heart and soul. Story 24. How it drives the stress and anxiety as a constant state in your entire household. Even for young kids who don't understand money completely. We knew something was wrong. We knew when there wasn't enough money to buy groceries before we saw the lack of food. We heard the yelling about money. We knew not to ask for anything or get yelled at or shamed. It was a constant state of instability. And yes, having literally no food when you get home from school sucks too. So does going to bed hungry. So does having no adults in the house most of the time because they are always working. I had friends who had large houses, tons of food, and moms who made them a snack or cookies after school. Asked them how their day was. Helped them with homework. The mood was light and fun and happy. It literally felt like a different universe to me. Story 25. Being poor doesn't just mean being money poor, you're also time poor. When you can't afford a vehicle, you have to take public transit. When you have to take public transit, it takes you dramatically longer to get anywhere. This decreases the time you have to do things like make healthy meals or pursue further education to better your job possibilities, as well as increases the time you need to pay any potential babysitters or daycare. Additionally, it decreases your downtime or time for socializing for you to relax and get yourself into a better mental state. It also eats into the time you can spend on things like going to the gym, which you probably can't afford a membership anyway, which then leaves you at greater risk of being injured or out of shape due to a lack of muscle. It worsens your later years in life. Combine this with a lack of time and money to prepare healthy meals, and you have a health disaster and poor mental health. Same deal when you are at home. When you're poor, you probably don't own a home, which means you rent. When you rent, you may not have a full kitchen with large freezer. This means you can't stock up on perishable foods to freeze when they're a good price. If you merely have a hot plate or toaster oven rather than a full-sized oven, it means you have to spend longer to cook larger meals. Rather than preparing a large casserole in 40 minutes, now you've got to spend 80 minutes doing it since the toaster oven is too small to do it in one batch. Being time poor is one of the effects of being poor that people usually don't think about, but it is a significant one that worsens the person's quality of life. Story 26. That all the helpful advice they give is useless when it's advice to buy something. I didn't buy $20 shoes to save money, and telling me that $100 pair of boots would last years was just insulting. I bought $20 shoes because all I had was $20 and the duct tape wasn't enough to keep my old ones together. When you say I'm broke, a lot of people don't realize it's literal. They think it means my bank account is kind of low and I need to take it easy till payday. This is not the case for poor people. When I say I'm broke, I mean my bank balance is either zero or overdrawn and I'm only eating every other day until payday. Story 27. How happy I really was. I had parents in their 20s with 2 kids. I had no video game systems from kindergarten to 6th grade, always played outside with friends. I had hunger a lot, unfortunately, but learned to make cheap alternatives. Tortilla plus spaghetti sauce plus cheese equals pizza, ramen noodles galore, bread plus cinnamon plus sugar equals cinnamon toast. I made lasting friendships with neighbors and friends and with family who became like my second mom or dad. Grandparents who were well off would happily lavish us with cookies and decent cereal and breakfast and dinners. Things were all right. Story 28. Secret Santa is traumatic. Around 3rd or 4th grade, the teacher explained the concept of Secret Santa. We'd each wrap a present and bring it to class, dropping it off anonymously into the Secret Santa bin. Then, after each kid had brought a present, the teacher would give each kid a random gift from the Secret Santa bin. I didn't have a good relationship with my parents. We're immigrants, and my parents don't really understand how Christmas works in the US. So I didn't even think to tell them about this Secret Santa thing. So what I did was wrap up my best toy in some scrap wrapping paper I found on the playground. It was a Hot Wheels Mach 5-speed racer car. My best friend gave it to me because I had no toys. I also had a Star Wars medical droid and 2 stormtroopers that were also rejects from my friend. One who was melted due to being strapped to a bottle rocket on the 4th of July. Another had his leg chewed off by my friend's dog. My misfit toy collection can be sung to Bex. I got 2 turntables and a microphone. I got 2 stormtroopers and a medical droid. That medical droid was kept busy with those 2 damaged stormtroopers, I tell you. When you have imagination, you don't need toys or money. You'll never be bored if you have imagination. Anyway, I reluctantly dropped my best toy into the Secret Santa bin, because that's what we're supposed to do, right? Some weeks passed and finally the big day arrived. Friday before winter break, we get our Secret Santa gifts. I was so excited. You could say like a little kid at Christmas. Except this little kid literally never had a Christmas before. Never got any presents, other than the rejects from my friend. And so the fateful day arrived, and it started out wonderful. The teacher walked up and down the rows and randomly dropped a lovely wrapped gift onto each kid's desk. This was amazing. After she had given all the gifts, she gave the signal to open them, and a frenzied whirlwind of little kids ripping wrapping paper began. This was so wonderful. And there it was, Boba Fett. A brand new toy in that packaging. It was so beautiful. The classroom was a cacophony of joyous little kid squeals, except one. A little boy was crying. There was a commotion. The teacher was whispering and hovering over the crying kid. After some time, the teacher got up in the front of the class. She held something in her hand and raised it high up. "Who brought this?" she demanded. No one answered her. She shook the object at the class, but no one said anything. "Who brought this?" she repeated. Finally, after a good look, I saw what the object was. It was my Speed Racer Mach 5 Hot Wheels car. "Who brought this?" she demanded again. Sheepishly, I raised my hand, and in the blink of an eye, the teacher was beside me. She didn't say anything. She simply placed the Speed Race 5 Hot Wheels car on my desk and snatched the nearly opened Boba Fett Star Wars figure. Quickly, she dashed through the rows on Dancer, on Prancer, on Vixen, and delivered it to the little boy who was still sniffling, a not-so-secret Santa after all. To this day, I still do not like Christmas or birthday presents. When you have nothing at all, you always still have something. Imagination and a sense of humor. You value what you intrinsically have far more than all the extrinsic material goods. I don't like when people say that being poor builds character. It sounds like a cop-out or a consolation prize. It sounds like the gift of rejected damaged toys, which would make the rich boy cry, but is yet a treasure to the poor kid who literally has nothing but imagination. Just clap your hands where it's at. I got 2 stormtroopers and a medical droid. Story 29. I grew up on welfare and was completely on my own at the age of 17. I had to work so much harder for things that most of my friends took for granted, like rent and food, college and university tuition, etc. And because I had to pay for everything myself, it took me a lot longer to get anywhere. I didn't graduate university until I was almost 30. Everyone else financially had a decade asterisk head start. Story 30. Growing up way too fast because you realize how poor you are. I was aware that we lived in public housing and on food stamps early on. I felt a responsibility to do my part and not bother my mom for money or anything because I didn't want to cause her any stress. Never got to go on field trips, never participated in any extracurricular activities. All of this because we didn't have any money. It's a sad feeling, especially understanding the why. I felt very different from my friends. This stays with me even to this day as an adult with a career and financial stability. Story 31, what it's like to starve. We could hardly afford groceries. Hunger was a constant companion. 3 meals a day simply didn't exist in my home. I was lucky to get 2 meals a day. Some days the only meal I had all day was the free lunch they fed me at school. Many was the time I'd be watching TV, which I did a lot. At least that entertainment was free of charge. And see commercials for food products, supermarkets, fast food places, and see food scenes in TV shows and movies. Such images of food served only to torture me and drive me up a wall because many was the time I was watching with a growling, empty belly. When I was 12, Mother managed to snag a great deal on an apartment in a 2-family apartment house in a neighborhood that was definitely middle to upper class. One of the very nicest neighborhoods in the city. We were way out of our element in that neighborhood. As a matter of fact, we were the freaks of the neighborhood. We were the poorest people in the neighborhood. We were the only family on welfare in the neighborhood. Out of the dozens upon dozens of kids in the neighborhood, my siblings and I were the only kids who were being raised by a single parent. All the other kids were being raised in 2-parent families. Whereas we were the poorest in the neighborhood, our very next door neighbor must have been the richest guy in the neighborhood. He owned his own successful demolition company. He owned the two-family apartment house he and his family lived in. They lived out of their first-floor apartment and their basement while renting out their second-floor apartment. They owned a house in Florida. They owned a fleet of cars which would get replaced with a new fleet of cars every 1 or 2 years. When his oldest son got married, he bought his son a two-family apartment house across and down the street. My sister and brother made friends with a couple of their kids. They'd come home with tales of their wealth and all the nice stuff they owned. I've never been inside their home, but I could see into their dining room from our windows, and the furnishings were so opulent, fancy, and expensive. I'd bet their dining room furnishings alone cost more than everything we owned in the whole world. My brother once told me how their mother went food shopping once a week, every week, and how she spent a minimum of $100 each time, even as much as over $200. In our home, our mother went food shopping only once every 2-3 weeks, and then she'd spend only around $10-12 on food. The highest she would ever spend on grocery shopping was $20. It was a big deal to us kids if and when our mother spent a whole $20 on grocery shopping. One time, the next-door rich guy's youngest kid was hanging out with my brother at our place when the kid decided to go to the toy store to buy himself some new toys. My brother tagged along. A couple hours later, they both came back with a huge armload of toys, mostly Transformer toys, as that was the hottest toy around that time, and deposited them on our table. My brother's friend, I think he was around 8 years old, I was 9 years older in my teens, then took out his cash change from his purchases out of one pocket and his wallet out of the other pocket, so that he could transfer his change into his wallet. I was standing right behind him as he opened his wallet. My eyes bugged out of my head. Inside were 50s and 20s and some 10s, lots of them, lots of 50s, lots of 20s, a very thick wad of them. I don't recall seeing any 5S or 1S, not until he stuck his change into his wallet. Now he had some 5S and 1S in there. I don't know the exact amount he had in his wallet, but he definitely had more than enough cash on him that could have paid for our rent and groceries for about 6 months at least. Imagine an 8-year-old kid walking around with that much money in his pocket, more than most adults. All the cash I had on me at that very moment in my pocket was a lousy 3 cents, 3 pennies, which literally represented all the money I had in the world. I didn't even own a wallet. What for? I never had enough money on me that necessitated the need for a wallet. Later on, my brother and his friend left, taking the toys with them. I went straight into my bedroom. I dug out of my pocket the 3 pennies I had on me and slammed them down on top of my bedroom dresser and stared at them. They were all tarnished. They didn't even have the decency to at least be shiny pennies. Man, being poor sucks. It sucks even more when you've got real-life rich people living next door to contrast your life with. Story 32. In the early 1970s, we lived in a house with no electricity or running water for over 10 years. We heated the house with a wood stove and we used kerosene lamps for light, and we listened to a battery-powered radio for entertainment. We used a little house out back for relief from Mother Nature, and we bathed in a steel tub once a week. We wore hand-me-down and second-hand clothes, and we got new shoes once a year. When it was warm outside, we played outside, and when it was cold, we stayed inside. We had a few toys, we had some books, and we also went to the library too. Sometimes we'd go to a movie or something like that too. Mom was an excellent cook, and we ate simple food, but it was always good. We usually had a nice Christmas. We got a few presents each. Sometimes we'd go out to eat when Dad had a little extra money. As an adult, we've had some financial difficulties, and we were homeless for a time. Luckily, we got back on our feet after a while, but it was quite stressful, and it is a life-changing experience for sure. Being poor is different for every family. We didn't go without the necessities of life. We just had less than others, but we made do with it. Story 33. I had to actively stop overstocking my pantry. My husband would ask why it always needed to be so full, but I was afraid that if something bad happened or an unexpected expense popped up, I wouldn't have food for us or our kids. Also, we know how to be super creative and stretch everything. When my oldest was a baby, we didn't have any money for Christmas. I spent half my food money for the week on a small pack of diapers. I tore apart an old pillow, took some mismatched fleece and some grocery bags, and sewed him up a stuffed animal with arms that would crinkle when he grabbed them. 9 years later, it's still one of his most prized possessions. Story 34. The feeling of inconveniencing people if they spend money on me. When I was a kid and staying the night at a friend's house, I always felt really guilty if my friend's parents ordered pizza or bought ice cream or something. I was worried about them spending too much money on me, us kids, or seeming ungrateful. I marvel at children who will have no problem asking their friends' parents for a particular meal or treat. I understand it's totally normal. It's just hard to relate to. Story 35. You never escape the trauma of poverty. It's a PTSD response. I'm 41 and have spent the last 20 years of my life raising a family and relative wealth. My kids' childhoods are the antithesis of mine. They have gone to the same school their entire lives versus I went to 9 schools in 12 years, constant short-term leases. They've never seen an empty fridge versus I never saw a full one unless I visited friends. My daughter has a $8,000 flute and plays it beautifully versus I wasn't able to do school choir because that was extracurricular and I needed to be home to watch my sisters while mom worked. But I still worry about housing security. The kids have to eat everything on their plates, but can't finish off the milk bottle. I buy in bulk even if it's not likely I'll need bulk. Story 36. That many of the formative experiences of your childhood are not experienced by poor children. Vacations, birthday parties with all your friends, family nights out. A place you call home instead of the place you're living at right now and might not be soon. Just having time with your parents and probably having 2 parents. Kids from middle-class and upper-class families don't really think about money. It's basically a foreign concept to them until they have to be an adult. Children from working-class and poor families understand money because there's never enough of it. They know because the food runs out toward the end of the month, or because they get a hole in their shoe and their mom can't afford a new pair. Story 37. Period poverty is real. Yes, you can get a cheap pack of pads for less than £1, but it might be a real choice between pads or a loaf of bread so you can at least have toast to keep hunger at bay. Also learning to drive. My mom couldn't afford driving lessons for me when I got old enough, and when I started working, I couldn't afford to get lessons because I was paying towards food, rent, and bills. So your employment options are restricted because if you can't get public transport there and back, you can't apply. And if you can't apply, then your chance of earning more to be able to afford driving lessons is restricted. It's a viscous circle. Story 38. The weird relationship with food that poverty can give you. Even now, eating is a stressor and chore, even though there's plenty around. All my friends are foodies who love to grocery shop, explore cuisines, and cook. I have horrible memories of food insecurity that may never go away. I'm a healthy weight and don't have appetite issues, but I hate taking more than 5-10 minutes to do anything related to food. Eating or just seeing people eat often makes me sad. I eat the same thing every day so I don't have to think too much about it and just get it over with. Story 39. Being poor is the most expensive thing that could happen to you, not only financially, but more importantly, mentally. Your mental is the one thing that propels you in life. It is what I believe to be the most important thing to a human. Money will literally fix all of my problems. And before someone says money doesn't buy happiness or some other regurgitated BS, they don't know and never will know. Story 40. How frightening it is before it bottoms out. The lights go out, then bugs, then food might be scarce, then your dad is unemployed, and on and on. From a kid's perspective, it's intense. It's like 9/1 anxiety-provoking thing after another, completely unnerving. As an adult, I am terrified of falling into the same poor and frantic situation that I grew up in. I do okay, but I'm never comfortable spending money. I'm always saving. Story 41. Washing my school clothes in the bathtub so I wouldn't get picked on. Heating water on the stove in big pans to bathe with. Warming ourselves over a can of Sterno in the winter because the lights were turned off for non-payment. Eating cereal with powdered milk. Moving to a new school district every year because my parents kept getting evicted. Not learning anything about how to handle finances. Being embarrassed to use the free lunch ticket at school. And so many other things that were a normal occurrence for me growing up. Story 42. Knowing that having a hobby or wanting to do something for school or a sport, etc., would cost money your parents don't have. My dad raised my brother and I by himself for the 4 years I lived with him during high school. My mom was MIA and not paying child support. I quit softball my sophomore year because the school I went to required us to buy certain gear to wear to away games. It was literally a stupid-ass Nike jacket and cleats that had our logo on it and like $180. And no, I couldn't wear the same gear I had from my freshman year because it was out of date. I kept putting off telling my dad about it in hopes my coach would stop pestering me. He cornered my dad after practice one day, and I saw the color drain out of his face as he handed over the cash. I finished out the season and did not try out again junior year. I started working that summer through a program with DCF. I saved all of it and bought all of my school clothes and supplies. Got another job on weekends at a commissary bagging groceries for tips. Story 43. I buy and return things all the time. I buy it, then worry about spending money on things I really don't need. I worry what if something happens and I need something I don't have the money for. But the one thing I do spend money on is perfume. People always say, you smell so good. I grew up being the poor smelly kid. I don't ever want that again. My house is full of air fresheners, candles, and scents. My clothes are washed with smelly laundry soap, conditioner, scent beads, and dryer sheets. I splurge on expensive lotions and perfume. Story 44. In the late 80s, when I was in 8th grade, the style was to penny roll your pants and wear multiple pairs of different colored socks. I was told that we couldn't afford socks to do this. I took this to mean that we just couldn't afford the luxury of socks. So when my socks wore out, I stopped wearing socks. I was shamed for having smelly feet, but felt powerless to do anything about it, other than put baking powder in my shoes and leave them outside, and wash my feet after school. It never even occurred to me to tell my parents my feet smelled because I had no socks. I assumed they knew, but still couldn't afford that luxury. I detest wearing shoes without socks, even just to run out to the car. It's also the most requested item by the homeless people who I've asked. Story 45. That being poor costs time. I can't just go to one grocery store. I go to 3. I can't buy pre-cut fruit, have to cut it myself. Can't just pop in the grocery store and shop. I have to create a menu, then a list from the weekly ads, then scroll through the coupons. It's incredibly time-consuming, the time I spend on meal prep for the week, because we can't afford to go out to eat. Story 46. One thing that people who didn't grow up poor often don't understand is the mental toll of constantly living in survival mode. It's not just about not having the money for nice things. It's the relentless pressure of having to make impossible choices, like deciding between paying for food or utilities. You learn to calculate everything: how far you can stretch leftovers, how long you can wait to fix something before it breaks completely. And there's this constant nagging anxiety because one unexpected expense can tip everything over. Also, the social aspect. Being poor isn't just about lacking money. It's feeling excluded, like you don't belong in certain spaces, conversations, or experiences. It's deeper than just finances. Story 47. Didn't grow up poor but raised my son poor. Not eating so your child could eat and lying to them with a smile, telling them you aren't hungry. Saving all receipts, so if you need gas money, you can return items to get gas to go to work. Entering drawings and contests throughout the year, so hopefully you will win something to make the tree look fuller on Christmas morning. Only taking lower-paying jobs that would allow you to bring your child if they were sick or during summers because you couldn't afford childcare or to miss a day's pay. Story 48. How we'll always be poor in her mind, even if you climb the social ladder. At least for some. It's psychologically hard to assimilate to higher social classes. Poor America is a very different country from middle-class America, and the same is true for almost any other country. Our food was different, our holidays were different, our stress was different. You'll always feel like an imposter being in upper circles. It's hard to find people you are 100% comfortable being your authentic self. I'll always feel like they're going to find out or actually really poor and want like you will fire a. I'll always wonder if we're talking polished enough, or was her accent a little too ghetto in that last convo. I'll always feel like you have to dress up and wear nice clothes at that fancy job, even after working there for years. I'll always have the food insecurity in the back of her mind when her coworker throws away half the food on his plate during lunch every day. It's not so much fitting in, more so social mannerisms matter more up there, and you recognize you don't know jack shiznits about it. If we're lucky enough for that step up the social ladder, you might be a little psychologically stunted from wholly thriving there. The bigger the step, the bigger the brain fog. Story 49. Hot water is a blessing. Growing up, we used to drink Seneca apple juice in the big glass bottles, not very often. And we would keep the bottles to heat bath water and using our 20-year-old microwave. It was the kind of microwave before speed buttons where you had to press 12 buttons just to make it work. Story 50. I used to live in a home made out of sticks and without running water in Mexico. We moved to the USA when I was 5, and it was a huge cultural shock. I remember I couldn't get over the concept of running water. We moved to a wealthy part of the country, DC suburbs, so my bus route would go through the suburbs with big-ass houses. It blew my mind. At the time, my parents were renting a single room in a townhome for them, my brother and I to all share. Growing up, my mom would make me feel guilty over any expense. Every dollar that I spent was a dollar that could go towards my dad being able to go to the doctor. Story 51. The immense feeling of guilt for being a burden on all your friends and their parents. Guilt for wanting to stay at your friend's house more than your own because they have nice things and good snacks. The drive as an adult to never fall into that situation for yourself. Never taking a risk for a job opportunity because it's not safe for your paycheck. Started working right out of high school to help with the bills, and never actually figured out what you may have wanted to do. You just kept working and trying to make more. The guilt of not helping your parents more because they still are poor, but wrestling with the fact that you were poor your whole childhood because they are the way they are, and you can't change that. The thought of having children frightens you because you don't want to bring a child up and risk raising them in a poor household if you can't afford it. Story 52. I spent years of my youth living in a trailer home that majorly deteriorated as we lived there. I'm talking a huge hole in the floor, lack of proper plumbing, and just plain uncleanliness, if I'm honest. There were only maybe a handful of times that I invited friends over to my house when I lived there, because I felt way too embarrassed about my living situation. Even if the house was clean, it still looked horrible. I guess I think middle-class people take for granted that their houses look nice and inviting and comfortable, haha. Story 53. Growing up poor often leads to a deep-seated fear of judgment, which can fuel social anxiety. When you're bullied or treated differently because of your financial situation, it pushes you to hide it, whether by trying to wear better clothes or avoiding revealing where you live. This constant effort to conceal your circumstances creates a sense of mistrust, even with your closest friends. You fear that if they truly knew the extent of your poverty, they would judge or reject you. As an adult, this can make it difficult to form meaningful connections with others, especially with those who haven't experienced the same struggles. Their privilege may make it hard for them to truly understand the pain and hardship you endured, which can leave you feeling isolated and misunderstood. And this is literally how I feel in my life right now. Story 54, driving. I grew up without a car, so know all about them. Didn't get to learn to drive at 17 like other people in my school. I have never felt the need to learn, and it feels too expensive for lessons and tests. Even if I got a license, I'd still have to find a way to buy a car, and I don't have parents who can buy one for me, and also, I'd have to pay for insurance and fuel. It seems like a money pit, and since I grew up poor, I don't want to make myself worse off by spending so much money when I can just use public transport or walk. I didn't think much of it till the day my middle-class boyfriend said, "Just learn to drive, it's easy." Now, more and more jobs are asking people to have a driver's license, which narrows my options, currently looking for work. Maybe one day, I will get my license, but the idea of driving a car is pretty scary. I don't know the basic stuff like most people. Story 55. My husband grew up poor, and I grew up upper middle class. I remember when we started dating, he kept a comforter that his sister had bled on and it left a stain. He was like, "Well, it's been washed." He comes from a family of hoarders on one side. Meanwhile, I take things monthly to donate. I know where his tendencies come from, scarcity. We have been together 16 years. He still hoards cash, but has really gotten better with material possessions. Therapy has been really helpful. Story 56. The fear around money never goes away, ever. Every decision I make in my adult life revolves around creating the financial stability I never had as a child. My wealthier friends think very little of spending their savings on going on holidays or moving abroad and don't really understand why I won't do that, even though I now have the means. If they make poor financial choices or fall on hard times, they have their parents. If I do, I lose everything.